Before we dive into this incredible story, if you're enjoying these untold Hollywood secrets, please hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking celebrity revelations. Your support means the world to us. Now let's get into this amazing story. March 8th, 1973. Doris Day was sitting in the mahogany-paneled boardroom of Universal Studios, surrounded by 5 male executives who had just told her that at 49 years old, she was too old to play romantic leads anymore. What happened next would become legendary in Hollywood circles, not just because of what Doris said, but because of what she proved. Within 6 months, every executive in that room would publicly apologize to her, and one of them would be looking for a new job. This is the story of the day America's sweetheart taught Hollywood that age is just a number, but stupidity is forever. Now, let me back up here and explain what was happening to women in Hollywood in 1973, because understanding the context makes Doris's response even more powerful. The early 1970s were a brutal time for actresses over 40. The youth movement that had swept through Hollywood in the late 1960s had created an obsession with young, fresh faces. Established stars like Elizabeth Taylor, Debbie Reynolds, and even Grace Kelly were finding it increasingly difficult to get leading roles. Hollywood had convinced itself that audiences only wanted to see young women in romantic comedies, recalled entertainment journalist Rex Reed. It was short-sighted and cruel, but it was the reality of the business. Doris Day, at 49, was feeling the effects of this ageism more than most. Despite having been one of the biggest box office draws of the 1960s, despite having a string of successful films and hit records, despite being beloved by audiences worldwide, studio executives were starting to see her as past her prime. The industry had decided that Doris represented the old Hollywood, explained her longtime friend Rock Hudson years later. They wanted new faces, new energy, new stories that appealed to younger demographics. But Doris Day was far from finished. She just needed the right opportunity to prove it. That opportunity came when Universal Studios offered her a 3-picture deal that would have been insulting to any major star, let alone someone of Doris's stature. The meeting that would change everything was set up as a discussion about future projects. What Doris walked into was an ambush. Actually, let me tell you about the executives who were in that room, because understanding who they were makes their eventual humiliation even more satisfying. Leading the meeting was Harrison Goldman, head of production at Universal. Goldman was 52 years old, had been in the business for 20 years, and considered himself an expert on what audiences wanted to see. Harrison thought he had his finger on the pulse of American entertainment, recalled former Universal publicist Janet Mills. He was convinced that the future of Hollywood belonged to young actors making films for young audiences. Joining Goldman were 4 other executives: Thomas Brennan from distribution, Robert Chen from marketing, David Sullivan from development, and Michael Torres from publicity. All men, all between the ages of 35 and 55, all convinced that they knew better than Doris Day what kind of movies she should be making. The meeting started cordially enough. Goldman opened by praising Doris's past contributions to Universal and expressing the studio's desire to continue working with her. "Doris, you've been a tremendous asset to this studio," Goldman said with the kind of false warmth that experienced actors learn to recognize immediately. "Thank you, Harry. I'm excited to hear about the projects you have in mind." "Well, that's what we wanted to discuss with you. The landscape of Hollywood is changing, and we need to adapt to new realities." Doris sensed where this was heading, but she let him continue. "Audiences today, especially the younger demographics that drive box office success, are looking for different kinds of stories, more contemporary themes, more relevant characters. And we think it might be time for you to consider transitioning away from romantic leading roles." The room went quiet. Doris looked around the table at the 5 men who were essentially telling her that her career as a romantic star was over. "What exactly are you suggesting, Harry?" "We're suggesting that there are other types of roles that might be more appropriate for someone at your stage of career." Thomas Brennan jumped in. "Character parts, supporting roles, maybe some television work." Mother roles, added Robert Chen. Mentor figures, women with wisdom to share rather than romance to pursue. Doris felt her blood pressure rising, but she kept her voice calm. You're saying I'm too old to play romantic leads? The executives exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with stating their position so directly. Finally, Goldman spoke. We're saying that audiences expect a certain authenticity in romantic comedies, and the reality is that most of our target demographic finds it difficult to believe in romance involving women over a certain age. What age would that be? Honestly, 40, maybe 45 at the absolute maximum. Doris stared at him. Harry, I'm 49 years old, not 69. I'm in excellent health. I look good. I feel good. And I can still carry a romantic comedy as well as any actress in Hollywood. We're not questioning your abilities, Doris. We're questioning market realities. That's when Michael Torres made the comment that would seal all their fates. Look, Doris, let's be honest here. You represent a certain era of Hollywood that's ending. The wholesome, innocent girl next door thing worked great in the 50s and 60s, but it feels dated now. Dated? Audiences want more sophisticated stories, more complex relationships, more mature themes that younger actresses can bring to the screen. David Sullivan nodded. It's not personal, Doris. It's just business. The industry has moved beyond the kind of simple romantic comedies that made you famous. Don't forget to comment below and let us know what other inspiring comeback stories you'd like to hear about. What happened next would become the stuff of Hollywood legend. Doris Day stood up slowly, walked to the window overlooking the Universal lot, and spoke without turning around. Gentlemen, let me tell you what I think about your market research. She turned to face them, and everyone in the room could see that America's sweetheart had been replaced by something much more dangerous. You think I'm too old to play romantic leads? You think audiences won't believe in romance involving women over 40? The executives nodded nervously. Well, let me share some market research of my own. Doris opened her purse and pulled out a small notebook. My last film, Send Me No Flowers, made $8.2 million domestic. My film before that, The Thrill of It All, made $12.4 million. Move Over, Darling, made $9.8 million. She looked around the table. How many films has Universal released in the past 3 years that made more than $8 million? The executives were quiet. I'll tell you how many. 7 out of 43 releases. That means the too old actress sitting in this room has a better track record than 85% of your current slate. Goldman tried to interrupt. Those numbers are from several years ago. Those numbers, Doris continued without pause, are from films where I played romantic leads, films where audiences supposedly couldn't believe in my romantic appeal. She sat back down and opened her notebook to another page. But let's talk about those younger actresses you think are the future of Hollywood. Let's see how their recent romantic comedies have performed. She read off a list of recent releases starring actresses in their 20s and 30s, along with their disappointing box office numbers. $3.2 million, $4.8 million, $2.1 million, $5.6 million. These are your sophisticated stories, with mature themes performed by younger actresses. The room was dead silent. So explain to me, gentlemen, how actresses half my age making films that earn half as much money represent the future of this industry. Thomas Brennan tried to defend their position. Doris, you're looking at individual films. We're talking about long-term trends and demographic shifts. Am I? Let's talk about trends. Doris flipped to another page in her notebook. Do you know what the fastest growing demographic in movie attendance is? Women over 35. Do you know why? Because they have disposable income, they make entertainment decisions for their families, and they're hungry for stories that reflect their experiences. But you're ignoring them. You're making movies for teenagers and college students who spend their money on concerts and records, not movies. Robert Chen looked uncomfortable. Our research shows. Your research is wrong, and I can prove it. That's when Doris delivered the challenge that would change everything. "I'll make you a deal. Give me one romantic comedy. Let me choose the script, the director, and the male lead. Give me a reasonable budget and normal promotion." The executives looked at each other uncertainly. "If the film doesn't make at least $10 million domestic, I'll accept that you're right. I'll transition to character roles, supporting parts, whatever you think is appropriate. And if it does make $10 million, Doris smiled, and it wasn't a particularly friendly expression. "If it makes $10 million or more, then every person in this room publicly apologizes to me for suggesting that I'm too old to carry a romantic comedy, and Universal commits to a 3-picture deal on my terms, not yours." Goldman laughed nervously. "Doris, that's not how the business works. We can't just..." "You can't what?" "Take a bet on proven success, risk money on an actress who's made this studio millions of dollars over the past decade." She stood up again. "Or are you afraid that you might be wrong, that your market research might not be as accurate as you think?" The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Finally Goldman spoke. "What kind of budget are we talking about?" $2 million. Standard romantic comedy budget for 1973. "And you're confident you can deliver a $10 million return?" "I'm confident that I understand my audience better than you do." The executives huddled together for several minutes, whispering and calculating. When they broke apart, Goldman looked like a man who'd been backed into a corner. "All right, Doris. You've got a deal. 1 picture, $2 million budget, your choice of material and collaborator. And if you succeed, we'll reconsider our position on your career trajectory." "That's not what I said. I said public apologies and a 3-picture deal on my terms." Another huddle. More whispered conversations. "Fine. Public apologies and we'll discuss a new 3-picture deal." Doris shook her head. "Not discuss. Commit. 3 pictures. $2.5 million budget each, full creative control, standard star compensation." Goldman looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant, but he nodded. "Deal." 6 months later, The Doris Day Show. The movie was released nationwide. It wasn't just a success, it was a phenomenon. The film made $14.2 million domestic and another $8 million internationally. More importantly, it proved that audiences were starving for the kind of warmth, humor, and authentic romantic chemistry that Doris Day had always provided. The movie was like comfort food for audiences who'd been fed a steady diet of cynical, depressing films, observed film critic Pauline Kael. People remembered why they'd fallen in love with Doris Day in the first place. But the real vindication came from the audience demographics. The film's biggest audience wasn't teenagers or young adults. It was women over 35 and couples over 40, exactly the demographics that Goldman and his team had dismissed as irrelevant. The trade papers picked up the story immediately. "Doris Day proves executives wrong," read the headline in Variety. The Hollywood Reporter ran a detailed analysis of how Universal's ageist assumptions had nearly cost them a major hit. True to their agreement, all 5 executives issued public apologies. Goldman's statement, published in the trade papers, read, "We were wrong about market trends and audience preferences. Doris Day's success proves that talent and star power transcend age demographics." Thomas Brennan, Robert Chen, David Sullivan, and Michael Torres all issued similar statements acknowledging their error. But the most satisfying moment came when Harrison Goldman was quietly asked to step down as head of production 6 months later. His replacement was a woman, Sherry Lansing, who would go on to become one of the most successful studio executives in Hollywood history. The Doris Day incident taught Universal that dismissing experienced talent based on age was not only morally wrong, it was financially stupid. Lansing explained years later. Doris Day went on to make 2 more successful films under her 3-picture deal, both of which exceeded studio expectations. More importantly, her success opened doors for other actresses over 40 who had been written off as too old for leading roles. Doris proved that the industry's obsession with youth was based on prejudice, not box office reality, observed entertainment journalist Army Archard. She single-handedly changed how studios thought about age and commercial viability. In 1999, 26 years after her confrontation with the Universal executives, Doris Day was asked about the meeting that had changed her career trajectory. Her response was vintage Doris Day, gracious on the surface, steel underneath. "Those men learned something that the entire industry needed to learn," she said with a smile. "Age doesn't determine talent, appeal, or box office success. Prejudice and narrow thinking do." The day studio executives called Doris Day too old became the day Hollywood learned that some stars don't fade with age, they just get more powerful. Goldman and his team thought they were managing an aging actress's career decline. Instead, they discovered that America's sweetheart was also America's smartest businesswoman. And when you bet against someone who understands both the audience and the industry better than you do, you don't just lose the bet, you lose your job. March 8, 1973. 5 men tried to convince one woman that her best days were behind her. 6 months later, that woman proved that her best days were just beginning. Doris Day's response didn't just make them apologize, it made them realize that in Hollywood, talent doesn't have an expiration date, but ignorance does, and sometimes the most satisfying victories are the ones where you prove your critics wrong by succeeding exactly as yourself. Age is just a number, but box office success, that's forever. Just ask the executives who learned that lesson the hard way, from America's sweetheart, who turned out to be America's most dangerous woman when she needed to be.